way through John's presentation, I believe, to answer some questions. There's sort of a little break. And if you've got, we'll keep an eye on the chat, and if you can tag any questions that you think you'd really like to hear the answers to with a like, we'll ask the ones that seem to be most popular. John, I don't know whether you're happy to kind of follow up on questions afterwards if we don't get time for everybody's. But we'll make space for as many as we can and try and give ourselves about 10 minutes at the end as well. So that's enough from me, and I'll hand over to John to introduce things properly.
Super. Yes. Hello. My name's John Barbrook. I noticed quite a few familiar names of people who've signed up for this. So yeah, if you've not met me before, my name's John Barbrook. I'm a faculty librarian for Science and Technology and Health and Medicine here at Lancaster University. But some people might have known me and my other guys way back when I used to be the head of Library and Evidence Services at Luton and Dunstable Hospital. Which is interesting because it ties a lot into things I've done in the past. The presentation I'm talking is into what we're discussing now. So what are we going to be discussing today? Leave my presentation on there. There you go. So what are we discussing today? So I'm going to discuss about decolonisation. We're going to discuss a little bit what decolonisation is, but mainly we're also going to discuss where libraries exist within decolonisation a little bit, where we can contribute to decolonisation. We're also going to be discussing grey literature searching, it's why you've all come here, but a specific focus on how useful it is in systematic reviews, and also how even more important it is now with systematic reviews that are decolonised. I'm also going to bring some solutions in. I'm also going to talk about some of our plans we've got here at Lancaster moving forwards with both decolonisation and improving our systematic review service and our systematic review facility, or the offer we have here, which we're quite proud of, and improving it so it's a decolonised systematic review offer. And like Kira said, we're going to have discussion and questions. I'm going to see time, depending on the timing, whether we can sneak some questions in the middle in a suitable spot. And also we'll have some time at the end for some questions as well. So like Kira said, please just ask those questions, hit a little like heart on them, and we'll get to the ones that are most popular. But I'm more than happy if you do want to follow up with something with me afterwards, send me an email. My email will be at the end, and I'll be more than happy to discuss, because a lot of this is evolving and a lot of it is feedback based. So if you say, oh, I don't agree with that, John, I'd love to hear from you, because I'm learning myself. So this is all going to be a little bit different, maybe. This isn't going to be a presentation. It isn't going to be a lecture, I'm afraid. Not that you were expecting one, hopefully. I'm not going to really offer you a decolonisation toolkit. I'm not going to say this is decolonisation. And I'm not going to tell you what to do, really. I'm not going to say, oh, this is the best steps to do. This is what we've done. It's brilliant. It's very context dependent. It depends on what resources you have available. And it depends on what you're able to think is suitable for your teaching and maybe your engagement with the concept of systematic reviews and decolonisation. I'm also going to talk a lot about mistakes. I'm going to talk about mistakes that I actually have personally made. You know, I've been a librarian for a while now, and I've realised actually engaging with decolonisation as a subject, that there have been times where if I'd have been aware of this, I could have done better. We'll talk about those. The best thing about those situations is we've always been learning in situations, and I've always learned a little bit from those. And I am going to talk about solutions. So if you came here listening to, great, I want to introduce an element of decolonisation, I'm going to talk a little bit about what we've done, what we are doing around about the subject of decolonisation to improve our offer. So, why am I doing this? Well, we got some feedback. At Lancaster, we are very, very focused on student feedback. We respond to it really, really well, and we try and listen to our students and do what they wanted. So around about a year and a half ago, we introduced our systematic review guidance. This was, we thought, very, very strong offer. We had a really good guidance. There were pathways. there was a lot of up-to-date evidence to help students to produce systematic reviews. And this was due to the fact that systematic reviews are becoming a larger part of a lot of the teaching here. We thought we will make sure that our systematic review guidance is really good. We have a process here where we're working with some of these, and it's sort of a living LibGuide. So if you use LibGuides, which is our library guide system, we update them a lot more frequently than some of the other guides. So our systematic review guidance can be updated monthly or even sooner, depending on advice we get. So we felt that we'd got a really good offer, really good guidance, absolutely fantastic, I thought. However, we got some feedback. And the feedback we got was this guidance, it's not suitable, we cannot use it. We're like, oh no. A number of our staff, we'd worked on it, academic feedback, student feedback, a lot of feedback had gone into that guidance. Why was the students not happy with this? Why did they feel it didn't help them to produce their systematic reviews? So what happened? Yes, there was a significant shift towards systematic reviews, both in our coursework and in research. A lot more researchers are focusing on systematic reviews. And of course, when we produced our library guidance, we went into it focusing very strongly on protocol. Prisma, rigid methods for literature searching, pathways, lots of guidance, pathways towards a good systematic review. Yeah, they were popular, well received by staff and students. But maybe we didn't consider one thing. Many of our students and researchers might be distance learners. They might be researchers from, or in fact, researching topics which are very focused about countries in the global south. I'd never considered that such a rigid topic, maybe, there would be a need for decolonisation. And of course, with the fact we have so many more qualitative systematic reviews, where the grey literature is of great importance, maybe we didn't consider that decolonisation would have such an effect on our topic. We hadn't made our guidance search in a worldwide focus as well as we could have. So we're talking about the global south. I know a lot of you researchers and staff who are visiting are probably aware of this word, but I'm just going to recap for maybe people who aren't as aware of what the global south means. The global south means it's a term which describes countries in Latin America, Asia, and Africa and Oceania. It's introduced in preference to terms like the third world and developing countries, which can be divisive, and they're not a preferred term. The global south describes mainly countries which were described as developing, while in the global north they're classed as developed. And they also tend to be countries which are sort of previous historical colonial subjects. So this is where the decolonisation element comes into it. We are looking for resources focused on the global south, i.e. Asia and Africa. These are valuable resources, which unfortunately, some of the ways that our methodologies work, it can miss those resources out. So I said I was going to say about some of our mistakes. I've already said one. I'm going to go and bring up another one as well. And this is quite interesting. It's interesting for me because coming into this topic, I didn't realise that I might actually need that I'd made mistakes in the past. But we have a lot of meetings and a lot of groups are working on these, which actually encourage you to talk and discuss concepts about the global south. And thinking about this, I came up with two situations where a decolonised search, that is a search which focused on resources in the global south, would have been of great use. I like to call it hairdressing and hospitals. So a long time ago, I was a hairdressing librarian. I know with such a fabulous haircut, you can't think it, but I used to look after hairdressing collection in college. And I was a very early career librarian, and I went in there and I went, brilliant, I'm going to do the best hairdressing collection in the world. It's going to be amazing. And I tried really hard to make a fantastic collection. I got books, journals, male grooming, and most importantly, I made sure I got books on African hairstyles. Many of the students wanted more books on African hairstyles, and so I bought all of them, put everything into the collection. I was quite pleased again about it. Promoted it, explained it to the students, and they all came. They came to my office and they said, "John, yes, we can't use this." I said, "What? Why not?" And then they explained to me, African hairstyles, it's more than just a book. All the books are written from a Western standpoint. They're using products you can get in America, England, hairspray, that sort of thing. It's more than that. Hairstyle is an identity. They've got styles, braided designs, cornrowing, and chain braiding, which are not just styles, but they're also part of your identity. And it's very important that when you produce these styles, you have to use traditional African products. You have to use products that will be used to do it, because then it actually creates an authentic hairstyle. And I never realized that. They actually told me some books they wanted, and they're impossible to get hold of. They're in fact only available photocopied 1,000 times. There's one specific book which is called Black Beauty, an Encyclopedia of African Hairstyles. And they told me about it, and I've never been able to find this book. One day I'll find it and I'll send it to that library, and my job there will be complete many decades later. And that's kind of the first time I realized, well, I didn't realize, I just thought I hadn't done a good job. What I hadn't done is decolonize worldwide search. Maybe the second time, much more recent, when I was working in Luton Dunstable Hospital, the doctor came and asked me, as they often do, we have a patient with a condition, and with no guidance, can you do a really good quality evidence search? So we did that again. So we did a really good quality evidence search, presented to the doctor. What did he say? He said, "I'm sorry, we can't use that. Unfortunately, it's not usable by me." And our comment was, well, why not? Why isn't it usable by us? You know, we've done this fantastic search. And then he said, the patients these are for is we don't often see this condition in the UK. We often see it with patients who have recently arrived at the UK, having immigrated from other countries. So that's why we don't have guidance. And the issue is you've given me guidance, but it's all interventions. The best way of treating this condition is not with drugs. It's not with a treatment. It's about the discussion and lifestyle change. And I was like, well, the advice there is there. And he said, no, the advice, the guidance you have given, it's from a Western standpoint. People's lifestyles are different. Then he explained to me about something very interesting about validity. He said, what you've done is what we refer to in research as internally valid. Really good. What we really need is something which is more mixed, something with external validity. That is something which can be used in the real life. And then he said to me, you need to search through the countries which these patients have come from. You need to include any guidance from those countries. And that struck me as something I hadn't really thought of doing. My assumption was, I'll search through the traditional resources, I'll search through databases, I'll search through major journals. But for him, the search was no good. He wanted something which was more local, which he could then talk to the patients about. So that was my little introduction. Just to say, this is why decolonization as a concept for me is really, really interesting. So what I'm going to quickly talk about, just a little bit about decolonization. And interestingly enough, these aren't my words. These are not one of the things we've worked with. I've worked with two colleagues here, Dr. Sunita Abraham and Dr. Richard Budd, to produce a decolonizing guidance. Most importantly, we're producing two things. One of them is almost an elevator pitch about decolonization, which tries to touch on a very complex subject, but in a very short paragraphs. This allows anyone to discuss decolonization and feel confident in discussing decolonization. Just going to see if here, would you mind just copying the link into the chat so people can have a look if they'd like. So what is decolonization? Decolonisation, it really relates to the recognition that kind of the knowledge and practices in higher education, you know, they have been formed and shaped by Western colonialism and, sad to say, racism over time. This is a historic subject. If you look at our LibGuide, it's a lot longer discussion. There's a little bit longer about that, all the elements of decolonisation. But the important part for me is, where does decolonisation, how do we touch on this? How do we contribute towards removing this element from our literature searching practice? And the simple fact is, we have to look at our procedure. And this is the phrase which I've taken from that. Decolonising raises a complex set of questions that go beyond merely extending reading lists. And that, for us as librarians, well, for me, I focus on that. Oh, we'll create a fantastic collection. We'll improve the reading lists. No, we need to think about the very nature of our relationships. And importantly, we need to think about the theories and methodologies we promote. We need to think about the method a lot more than we do about the media. We need to kind of go down to the basis of what we do and produce the decolonised search strategies, decolonised collection development policies. So what's the best way of producing a decolonised systematic review? How do we contribute towards our decolonised process? And it isn't really as much about purchasing diverse and decolonised materials, but it is about decolonising our guidance. That means looking at our guidance and thinking, are we focusing on a worldwide focus here? Are we ensuring that when we do a literature search, we by default include other countries in our search? Or do we by default include Africa, India, and Asia? I remember a very long time ago when I used to do critical appraisal training, when having Indian and foreign names on a paper, you were advised to double check that. Things like that are processes which aren't allowed now, which I would always bring up if it was mentioned. But quite a while ago was thought of as okay. If you had a journal not from the UK, US and America, is it regarded as good? And the same thing is guidance, is grey literature as good if it's from abroad? I think it's better. I think it's much better if it's not from the UK. It's also thinking about decolonising our practice. Fortunately, we have a really good group here, and I have to give a shout out for them. A large piece of work has been produced at Lancaster, and this is where a lot of this comes from. A lot of this thinking about decolonisation comes from the Decolonising Lancaster University group. It was only started in November 2019. It's already at 350 members. So I've benefited from that. It's thinking like this, you have to think about a lot more. And the interesting thing is people say, oh, you know, how is decolonising for you? Is it a difficult topic? And I say, yes, it's very difficult, but it's not the reasons you think. It's not because I'm white, that I come from a white background. I have been incredibly welcomed in the decolonising subject. What is difficult is the amount of thinking I have to do. I don't get given the answers. I have to think and create decolonisation strategies myself, which is incredibly challenging, but incredibly rewarding. So here's about some solutions. While we're here, has anybody got any questions so far about what I've just talked to you about? I'd be more than happy to answer them now, but if you've not, I can just continue. Oh, thank you very much.
Nothing so far.
Oh, super, that's fine. Because that's quite, you know, for me, that's quite the heavier part of the presentation. That's talking about what I've been thinking over the last year. We're coming to the aim of the undergrad and PGT as well, because we actually had some really good feedback. In fact, just now in this presentation from one of our new staff members. So yeah. Solutions. So what are we looking at solutions? So what have we been considering is a good solution? So focus, yes, first thing, improve grey literature. And that's why I'm going to focus on the presentation a little later. I'm going to focus on grey literature resources and policy and guidance, how to identify them. We're also going to produce some guidance, the decolonisation updates. So we're going to actually make sure that all of our guidance has a decolonisation element embedded into it. We'll have some links for that decolonisation and grey literature guidance later, so you can have a look at it. But I warn you, it's in process. They're living guidance, which means they're at an early stage. We've created a seed and they're being grown by feedback from researchers and students. We're also going to embed our decolonised methods in information skills and teaching. Translation will come into this later as well. At the end, it's one of the things we need to be considering. So yeah, we look at decolonised methods in information skills and teaching. So fortunately for us, information skills is easy. Paul Newham, who's one of our other librarians here, is very, very busy in the decolonisation of his subject area, so he would eagerly put it in. All of our faculty librarians who are responsible for any materials in the information skills will make sure to embed this information, but we need to promote it. We need to promote it to researchers and lecturers who might not be as engaged, but because we're dealing with some of the processes, the literature searching guidance, it will naturally filter up some element of decolonisation to their teaching. And finally, and this is very interesting, Fabio Ascari, our brand new graduate trainee, she's only been with her about 2 months, actually mentioned this to me as the fourth thing we should do. And I think it's really important. We should introduce students to decolonisation at an early stage. It should be aimed at undergrads as well as postgrads. Decolonisation, we talked about this subject now 2-3 times a week to undergrads, to postgrads, researchers, masters. Not so much with undergrads. We didn't realise we'd talk so much with them, but it turns out it's really valuable for us. But we didn't consider the undergraduates. And Fabius told us that, yeah, the undergrads, even ones from BAME backgrounds, actually are not so aware of decolonised search methods. They might be searching the way they're told to. They might not realise that they need to, in fact, decolonise their search methodology. So we have to actually focus on them. We have to focus on making sure that they're aware that they need to do worldwide searching with grey literature. And improve their search strategies as well. So what is the problem with grey literature and decolonisation? What is our issues here? So what is the kind of roadblock towards us using grey literature? So the issue is the same as traditional literature from the Global South. Grey literature in the Global South is small, less prolific publishers. They have smaller budgets. They're less able to produce. They're less able to create. So you end up with a much smaller body of knowledge. Also, the issue is the platforms they're hosted on are quite irregular. They might not always be available. There might be political or financial issues where the platforms go up on and offline. There can be cultural issues. Back at one time, 20 years ago, I had a job. I worked as a librarian in Nepal, and I was remembering the difficulty I had to actually get a website for the National Library of Nepal. I sat, I think, in the office for about 2 days, arguing, just to get a library, to go and get a library website. And this was a large organisation, and to get it repaired and get it fixed and available. And that is a difficult issue. If you can't just push your way through that. And so you'll find there's less websites available. You know, it's financial issues and cultural issues aside. So the platforms cannot always be online. Also can be difficult to find online. You've got the issues of web searching can often be in English language focused. If it's in English language, it will rank higher. It also can get swamped out a little bit by NGOs and aid organisations. NGOs have a lot of money and they seem to produce a lot of guidance for every single country in the world. And so when you search online in the English language, you will be getting largely NGOs and aid organisations. These can often be from a global north focused organisation. It can be not as local as you would want. So we want to kind of avoid using those immediately, although they are very highly valuable resources. We want to focus on items which are written for the global outlook from in-country organisations. And similar, the majority of academic papers, they are published by researchers in the global north. There's a lot of research produced, and I've put a Nature article there showing how underrepresented in research authors in the global south are, which is a real issue because you're going to be getting voices and published literature which are focused on that country, but not by people who are in those countries, which is extremely valid and very useful resources. Do you remember that doctor I mentioned? He talked to me about validity. And that's the really important thing I'd like to talk to you about. And that's what this is about in relation to the systematic reviews. So, thank you. Somebody's posted a decolonisation. Fantastic. So remember that doctor I talked about? Very thankful for him because he was an incredible fount of knowledge and talked to me about this subject when I was working in a hospital. He explained to me research needs to be internally and externally valid. Do a systematic review. Fantastic, brilliant. But is it usable? We've got lots of methodologies now, such as realist reviews. We've got qualitative systematic reviews. But when he talked to me, systematic reviews were a little bit more just systematic reviews. But he said that they have to be usable in the real world. And indeed, the focus is so much better on this now. And many systematic review protocols, they recommend searching grey literature, although only less than half of them do. Also, the issue is when we're doing systematic reviews, which is the problem we saw, if you're dealing with a topic which is focused on the global south, you know, there's an underrepresentation of research and topics from the global south. Remember, most of the published resource in economics in that case, they are broadly research of the global north, and they will be talking about global north issues. But while global south issues, the topics themselves will be underrepresented, you might not get enough evidence for a good systematic review. So you need to include grey literature, you need to produce scoping reviews and systematic literature reviews, and they're all much more reliant on a grey literature search. And in our case, we need to produce a decolonised grey literature search. So, solutions. What solutions have we been looking at in our library? Well, we've got three things here. We've got Google, we've got Overton, and we've got Policy Commons, which are three things we've identified as useful. So, Google searching. This is probably something a lot of you will be aware of. But if you haven't before, I'm going to just have a chat to you about it before. Maybe some of the reasons why Google searching is actually so useful. As an information professional, I've spent a lot of time telling students, don't use Google, use our databases. I've had a few students now tell me, but you told us not to use Google. And we're like, no, now use Google. The reason Google's really good for decolonised searching is because it scrapes pages. It's always available. And it actually caches the pages as well. So it can actually search a lot of evidence, and it can find things which are essentially hidden as well. So you will find your website will be in there, but it will be hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pages away from you being able to find it. The issue is it ranks higher quality resources better, but it decides what higher quality is. So things like if it's always available, if it's in the English language, and if it's not got spelling mistakes, they're the kind of things which will rate it higher. Again, I'm talking about things I used to work at. I did used to work doing web usability. And we used to say that we have all this fancy technology to rank your website higher in a company. All we did was produce a good quality website with a lot of text. That was it. We just made sure there were no spelling mistakes and the website was always available, and it would naturally increase its placing in Google. So I'm going to do a quick demo now of a quick search, but the difference is we're going to do a site search. If you've read the book Sarah Bonato, Searching the Grey Literature, it features quite well in that, and it's a very good example of doing this search. And this is just, let's see, let's see, you can leave the window. Sorry, I'll just get this around a bit. So, okay, so we don't get any. Oh, sorry, I'm just going to. So, I'll just share my screen so you can see what I'm up to. Okay, so this is Google. We've all seen Google before. So basically we have Google here. So what we can do in order to produce a good decolonized search through Google is we could search for a topic, for instance, health literacy. Let's do a search there. Now, as you imagine, with health literacy, we get a lot of UK-based resources, America, that sort of thing. But the difference is with health literacy, so what we can actually do as this topic is we can try and say, okay, we need to get the topic, we need to search for it in, let's see, Zimbabwe. There we go. So we put Zimbabwe in here. So what we need to do is know what is the Zimbabwe government website. Let's see. So let's have a look there. So in Zimbabwe, this is the interesting thing. Oh, it's offline. This is the problem you'll see a lot. There we go. So that's a very good example of one of the issues is the Zimbabwe government website has unfortunately not got a security certificate at the moment. And so it actually brings up an error. But we've just noticed gov.zw, right? That is any website from the Zimbabwean government will have gov.zw. So in our case, if we go back to Google and we put in this, site, gov.zw. What that will do will only search websites with gov.zw. And now if I do health literacy, okay. Magic. We have 6 papers. Those 6 papers we would have absolutely missed because they would have been buried. The governmental website would have been offline, maybe. It would not have the certificate working at that moment. And that would have ranked it lower in the actual search. And this is why this simple thing, it's always available for you, can actually help you to surface grey literature. You can do other things as well. For instance, you can say, okay, I'd like to see it as a PDF. We all know that things get produced in PDFs. There isn't a PDF of that at the moment. You can also take it a bit further. For instance, we don't want the government. We want anything produced in a Zimbabwean website. There we go. .zw, health literacy. That's much better. So there we go. We've now got much more information. And this is more blogs. It's more information about Health Literacy Month, seasonal campaigns. So this is giving you a lot more useful evidence. And again, you can do things like put .pdf on there. That'll provide any PDFs available. And also, and this is the thing that I like to do a lot, you can actually just use the tools they've already got and do any time past month. There we go. So there we go. We've got various websites which have the term health literacy, which went online in the last month. So Google itself is a very, very powerful way of surfacing grey literature. And I do encourage you to have a look at that book, Searching the Grey Literature. I find it very, very useful, and it's one of the key books which describes this way of searching Google to surface grey literature. And the second thing which we've looked at, and these are new products, these are relatively new, and these are grey literature databases. Two of the ones we've identified as being really quite rich in resources from the Global South are Overton.io and Policy Commons. Fortunately, one of the resources, which is Policy Commons, Overton.io, you have to have a subscription to use or a trial, and they were good enough to provide us with a, let's see, just paste that in there. I am just going to copy you a link, a trial, so you can have a look at it. I'll pop that in the chat. And that's a trial link to Overton.io that you can actually have a look at and have a try. So you can go and have a look at that and play yourself. But I'll just show you that as well while we're here. Okay, so what these are resources, and they host or they actually link to grey literature from the Global South. They're a different way of searching. So if your grey literature resource goes offline, it's still available in Overton.io. You can come back to it later. Sometimes they will actually host the resources, the grey literature, on servers, on websites, in the case of Policy Commons, in the global north, so they're always available. So this makes it very, very useful, and you can search through these resources. One thing we were told by students is really important, and it's what we like to call the regional grouping issue. So one of the things we're looking at resources is students said, could we have it so that we can search for regional groups such as BRICS, Arab League, low-income countries, and North Africa? And it's something we've not thought about, but it's actually super useful for external validity. If, for instance, you're doing a systematic review and there's not enough evidence in the country you're looking at, you want to go and spread your search out to similar regions. For instance, BRICS is Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. Okay, useful if you're writing a paper on emerging market economies, but there's not enough evidence in the country you're writing about. You can bring it a bit broader and search for all BRICS countries. Arab League, really useful, for instance, if you're writing a paper which you think might have an element, if, for instance, if the patient or the person who's been written about, the subject is broadly in an Islamic country, you can include all those other Arab Islamic countries. And doing a search just for the Arab League, really useful. Also, low-income countries, that's the standard one you can be looking at. No, I'll bring it up in a minute. So we've got the low-income countries as well. And also we've got North Africa. So that's that's useful to fill out places like South Africa, which can be quite different to North Africa. So I'm going to show you Overton.io now. I'll just log in, Overton.io. I'm going to log in here. It's a bit, sign in. Okay. And I'll share, and I'll just show you how it works. There we go. So here's Overton.io. Make it a bit bigger so everyone can see it. And what this does is it's really useful. So if I search for health literacy again, we're able to scroll down there and we've got lots of guidance. Again, as you'll see, very good. A lot of different evidence, a lot of different WHO organizational guidance. But we can take it through and we can go and look on the side. We can actually filter through to source types. For instance, we'll take it down and we'll go to source country. So now we can start to filter by specific countries. You can see how much evidence is produced by different countries, and you can see USA, IGO, UK, EU absolutely dwarfs other countries. But we can take it down and actually look at specific countries a lot better. For instance, if we want to look at Nigeria, have a look there. So there we go. We now are getting guidance and evidence from the government of Nigeria. Federal Ministry of Health from the government of Nigeria. We're much able to focus on grey literature from that country. And also, if I move that source country, like we mentioned about the regional groupings, we're also able to take them down to source region. So we've now got a selection. We can actually look at different source regions. In this case, we might be like, actually, we're going to look just at Africa, sub-Saharan Africa. And we can actually get larger African-based organizations and other countries like Tanzania, which might have interesting evidence, useful evidence, which might actually also be useful in your local setting. This is an incredibly useful thing, and I think we've already just recently had our first paper, which has just been published. I'll link to it afterwards, which was published by one of our researchers using Overton.io in the grey literature element of the search, which is again really, really useful. And I can see databases like this, which help surface resources from the global south, are also useful. So we've taken a subscription to Overton.io. One we haven't yet got a subscription to is polisoncommons.net. But we are discussing with them a little bit about how to make their resource maybe fit decolonise searching a little better, but very similar. Oh, off it goes. Oh. Sign in. You get a limited number of searches on this, so you can use it yourself. And again, we're able to choose specific information. Oh. The different languages as well. So that's something you might like to have a look at. We focused on using Overton.io at the moment, but we hope to have a subscription to Policy Commons as well in the future. They're both very useful resources. There's not a lot of overlap, so there's something you would definitely want to have a look at. And this all ties definitely back into that discussion about external validity. We want to identify more of these resources to bring into our literature searching practice. And don't just say you should use it if you're doing a worldwide search. Always encourage searching these. So on the rest, what are we doing now? So what are we going to be doing over the next year? We're focusing on getting this all done, probably in autumn this year. It'll all be available, hopefully. We're improving our decolonisation guidance, improving our elevator pitch. That link I showed you, that's on our guidance. We're also working on producing terminology, basic terminology for students and researchers around about the subject of decolonisation. For instance, subjects like what is colonisation? You know, what is a Eurocentric? Terms which are commonly used. We worry that they can be a little bit of a barrier if you don't understand the terminology coming into the topic, but by adding this to our guidance, it will improve people's understanding and enable them to engage better with the concept. And these are all in progress at our Decolonising and Grey Literature guidance. We want to start embedding into a library teaching as guidance, again, not as a decolonisation step, not as saying you should do a grey literature search this way, but if it's about Africa, make sure you do this. It should always be default and it should be the best practice. Interesting enough, we can still purchase diverse and decolonised materials. We're doing that. We've got lots of different resources at the moment. We've recently purchased Essential Anatomy, which is an anatomy program. It also has different body types, different skin colours, which enables you to be, it's much more engaging. If, for instance, the anatomy model is similar to something you would be familiar with and feel comfortable with. We're also looking at the primary source collections, such as Africa and South Asia Commons, and we also have the global and local collection here, which includes resources focused on Lancaster's involvement in the slave trade and connections made with researchers in the Caribbean. We have faculty librarians, Kira Murray and Paul Newham, who work in politics and arts, as well as decolonising reading groups here, with a lot of different streams in this university, all working on this one topic. And finally, it was mentioned, one of the things we do have to focus on, and that's dealing with non-English papers. this is something we've realised is really important. We read a lot about Farhad Shokhna. He's got a really good website. There's another link there. And you can read that. And he's discussing about how to actually engage with non-English resources. How do you bring those in? Because if you are doing a resource and you cannot read research and you can't read the language, you're at a big disadvantage. The recommendations is always find the native speaker, where to find help, and possibly how to use modern technology to enable you to screen through papers so you can actually integrate them. And that's, again, a really important focus here. And that's something we're going to be working on, working out guidance on how to improve and integrate non-English papers into your systematic reviews, especially the grey literature. Because grey literature itself is going to be less in the English language and much more in the language of the country it's focused towards. And we're also going to just keep on learning. We're going to keep on reading, talking, and contributing. One thing I've learned from doing this is it is a progress. It's a process, and we're constantly learning about this. And so I can't see myself in another decade being able to know everything there is about this. But by taking a small part, for instance, decolonising systematic reviews in grey literature, I'm helping out. I'm producing a small piece of work which will help feed into a larger process. So thank you very much for listening. I'd be very happy to speak to you about this topic, which is quite complex. It's a lot of facets to it, but I find incredibly interesting, and I've been incredibly happy to engage with this. Just to mention, I've been told, and I have to, it's very important, we also have a upcoming decolonising and literature searching event coming up. I'll leave this on the screen so you can have a look at it while we take the questions. So 30th of June, I'm just doing grey literature. This is kind of the facet I'm looking at, especially systematic reviews. But we've got our biggest topic here with lots of different facets. And so we're going to have an event 30th of June. Any LNM members, Academic Libraries North, please come, and if you've got something to say, if you've got a really interesting topic you wish to share, contact Doug Purvis and he'll add you to the agenda. We'll see who we've got available and create a really fantastic conference for everybody. Mainly it's going to be ALM members, but if you're outside of the ALM area, please do contact us as well. You might have something which really would be engaging for the members. So again, please do have a chat with us. So I'd love to answer some questions if you've got them. If there's anything you'd like to ask me.
I think I've been trying to keep track of the questions as we've gone through, John. Thank you for that. There's lots of questions that people have had, so we'll do our best. We've got about 10 minutes. We had a couple of questions early on from Steve and Lisa about what to do with searching literature in other languages, encouraging multilingual searching, hearing about what other people have been doing. Is there anything that we can say about what we do for non-English language sources?
Okay, that is one thing I'm not so, that is my learning process for the next half a year, is to integrate that into there. That's really interesting Medium blog from Farhad. He's absolutely fantastic. I was reading about that. At the moment, if we've got students who need to integrate English, we always say, find yourself a native English speaker. However, if you speak a language, you might have quite high demand on your time. Think of the translators in the NHS. They are always in high demand and they're very hard to find. So if you find someone who speaks that language, they might not have the time to commit to you. So probably what I'd be focusing on in the next 6 months is finding ways using translation software in order to reduce the numbers safely to something so you would only have to present and provide someone assisting you with, say, 30 to 40 references and not 300 to screen through, which could be really good. That's something I found from that blog was really interesting. But it is always good. And to be frank, it's really important to have someone who speaks the language and is from that country to actually contribute to your systematic review. That is a really key thing you should be doing in order to produce a fantastic systematic review. Okay.
Great. Okay. Elaine said that they have had a Policy Commons demo and will be having one from Overton. Do we have any preference between the two, having tried them?
I would tell, but Overton won't mind me telling you this, because they're both similar resources, but they actually work together and they discuss, so they actually focus on different areas of grey literature. So I prefer to have both. The one that won out over them was Overton.io, simply because of Overton.io has regional groupings in it, which allows students to cluster their searches around regional areas, allowing them to bring in topics from different countries which are nearby with similar religious, cultural, or financial systems. This makes it more valuable for us immediately. We have mentioned this to Policy Commons, and they said they would look into it, hopefully. It's something they could offer in the future. That's the major use for me and for our staff and students to use. We'd like both. That's why it went out, but just slightly went out over the other.
Just to address that last question that's come in about whether the recording will be available.
Yeah, okay.
Yes, it will.
It will be available online for anybody to watch later if you really want to.
Okay, let's have a quick look through.
John, what was the name? Can you repeat the name of the anatomy resource you purchased?
Oh, yep.
That was one.
Yeah.
Please.
I'll just go and get the link to it for you.
All right.
And then just whilst we're doing that, Moretta, I'm sorry if I don't pronounce your name right, Moretta, I think, has said, do we work with any bodies from the Global South libraries or networks who could advise on publications, as well as the hairdressing books, she says.
Yeah. There you go. So, sorry, I didn't hear that one. I was just trying to...
Yeah, sorry, I should maybe wait for one thing to be finished before jumping to the next. Yeah, so it was a question about whether we worked with any bodies from Global South libraries or whether there's any networks who could advise on publications.
We don't so much at the moment. I've used some contacts I have, mainly of researchers here who've worked in Global South libraries, to assist with our guidance. So some of their advice has helped me to understand this topic a lot better. But I haven't had any formal contact with them, with any at the moment, but it is definitely something which would be absolutely fantastic in the future to do.
And then David's asked, do we have any idea of subscription pricing for Overton for unis?
I'd love to tell you, but they wouldn't like me telling you. I will tell you, it's very affordable. It is very affordable for the content it has. It is still a subscription and of a price, but it is quite a new resource, so it's probably cheaper than many of the other resources. So I'd say get in quick, have an investigation of it. You know, compared to our other databases, it's very affordable. I'll just go and let's see. I also just linked to the latest paper, which we just had published with one of our researchers published it. I'll link that in a minute. If we've got another question, who used Overton? We used Overton as part of the search strategy, which was really useful in order to add a really easy grey literature search.
So I think Alice has had to leave, but she has said that her colleague Daniel is still here, and she had asked if we had any advice for developing decolonial literature search and guidance materials for library services that don't work on a subject specialism or liaison model. So I guess people that don't have faculty librarians assigned to particular subject areas.
As in a model?
I believe so.
Well,
yes. I don't know if Daniel's here and wants to clarify that.
Oh, please do. Because I would say, although I'm a subject specialist librarian, my subject's quite broad. I do health, medicine, science and technology, which would be probably 50% of the topics in this university. So probably the way that I work is I find it really useful in certainly considering systematic reviews. The fact is I work across 2 faculties. So for instance, we had an example of systematic reviews that are being produced in the environmental sciences. And we've managed to bring in a lot of the parts from health and medicine, which has very, very strong systematic review guidance, and discuss that in the concept of environmental science, physics, any other topics, which might not actually be aware of that. And so I found it really useful, the fact that it's like 2 faculties. That enables me to use things which are useful in one and bring them over. And for instance, we often have students from the management school here coming to discuss systematic reviews in order to do their systematic reviews better. So I would say there's no particular model in doing this. It just happens to be naturally because of the way the system works. And the fact is I run across 2 faculties.
Yeah, I think Daniel's just said that that what they have to do at Sussex is deal with kind of cross-subject. I mean, decolonising is something that comes up cross-subject, really. So these methods would be, I think, equally applicable if you're doing literature searching in English or sociology or something. I think that would be hopefully our aim, is to get tools that work across different subjects.
And it's useful as well because a lot of the systematic reviews that are being produced, they are cross-discipline. We don't often see systematic reviews which are purely health here at Lancaster. We see a lot more cross-discipline ones, for instance, technology interventions for mental health. That's quite a common thing we would see here. And that's 2 disciplines. That would be science and technology and mental health. We see a lot more subjects which are qualitative in nature. And again, they're cross-discipline. So kind of naturally moving towards that. So I think crossing across disciplines is an incredibly useful thing to be able to do.
I've got a couple more. I'll just try and whiz through. I know we're at the end of the session, but Karen's asked if institutional repositories might be helpful sources of grey literature and whether there's any useful listings of these. So if there's somewhere that you can kind of go through.
If you can link our grey literature again, one of the things we've recommended, we've been choosing a list of not quite institutional repositories because they're less common, but more regional repositories of evidence. Ones which are more focused on a country's academic output, because those are unlikely to feature in journal databases, but here we go, super, so that's fantastic. So we've got a really good link now. I'll probably steal these links later and add them to them because we're always doing that. And again, they will more likely have the evidence that you want. That's one of the reasons for Policy Commons and Overton.io, due to the informal nature of some of the grey literature produced in the Global South. It doesn't make it into repositories. It generally gets put on a website and left. And that's the really valuable thing about it, that it actually surfaces those when those in the individual, any individual guidance out there. Yeah. Creating a list of actual grey literature repositories is quite tricky because there are so many out there. So we're constantly adding, and that's where creating like living guidance is really useful. Because then somebody, usually a student, will come and say, I found this with my searching. And then there and then you go solid gold and you add it to the list. And so you just keep adding and adding and adding.
Yeah,
yes, we also have global index medicus as well. Yes.
And then finally, I'm sorry if I've missed any questions, but I think this is the last one that I have. Is from Kirsten, who said, is there any guidance on searching that has been produced in the Global South? Covering how to find guidance from a specific region that might be written by a librarian from that region. Do we know of any such guidance? that's
I
in
haven't,
existence?
but I would love to hear about it. I would very, very much like to. You know, I would greatly enjoy reading that if that was there, because that would be much more valuable than, in fact, you know, I'm lucky that I have travelled in the Global South. I've had some exposure to the topics and the issues, but of course, someone who is in the Global South and understands the topic better than I would be much more valuable for me. And, you know, I would learn so much from anything they produce. So if anybody does have that, share it to all the reading lists, all the mailing lists you can. I think you would be this week's hero for sure. But that brings up the problem with resource in the Global South. It's difficult to find sometimes, especially if maybe it's in another language. I will never, as I only speak English and some other languages not so well, I would be unlikely to find that.
Okay, I think that's everything, unless there's any more burning questions people want to drop in, but we have come to the end in terms of time. So thank you very much, John, and thank you everybody for your contributions. We've really enjoyed it, and we will see you again, hopefully.
Thank you very much, and thank you for listening.
Bye-bye.